Welcome and thank you for tuning in. Imagine stumbling upon a mysterious house, frozen solid on the outskirts of a quiet town, its walls cloaked in snow and ice, untouched for years. What secrets might it hold? Tonight we journey with Thomas, a man whose curiosity leads him into this frozen enigma. But as he steps through its icy threshold, he finds far more than he bargained for. Stay with us as we unravel the chilling story of the frozen hell house. When Thomas spots the frozen house just outside of the town of Wright, Wyoming, he is stunned, as he never even knew that there was a home there. But it would quickly get a lot stranger as Thomas starts hearing sounds when investigating the house. He decides to break in to figure out what is going on. However, Thomas would soon realize he should have never stepped foot inside this frozen hell house. Before we start our story, smash the like button, make sure to subscribe, and hit the notifications bell. Thomas was slowly making his way through the dark frozen house. His flashlight gave him a bit of an idea of where he was going, but it was still very difficult to see anything clearly. He could just feel that something was not right here. He had broken into the house because he had heard sounds coming from inside, but Thomas had no idea what he had gotten himself into. He would only find that out once he managed to make his way into a heavily locked door upstairs. When Thomas burst into the room, his jaw nearly dropped to the floor. No wonder this house had been so destroyed by the snowstorm. But what did Thomas find in the house, and what could it have to do with how snowed in the place was that winter? In Wyoming, in the tiny city of Wright, over 100-year-old records were broken. It had rarely ever been so cold for such a long period of time, so people had to take drastic measures in order to make it through these trying times. Still, some families seemed to be doing far better than others. While everybody was busy worrying about how they would manage to survive the severe cold, nobody had noticed one lonely old house at the edge of the city. It seemed, unlike all other houses, to be making no effort at all into warming the home enough for it to be bearable. It was a potentially dangerous situation. The house had welcomed the freezing cold, and in 1 week's time, the snow and ice had taken complete hold of the building's outer walls. This had created a bizarre display of white. The first person to finally lay eyes on the site was another inhabitant of the small city named Thomas, living in an adjacent neighborhood. After the storm that had been raging through the area for nearly 2 days now had calmed, Thomas decided to get outside to see the damage that had been caused. The visibility in the neighborhood had improved significantly, and to his pleasant surprise, most of the main city was still in relatively good shape. But then he started to walk along the outskirts of the city, where he noticed a faint white-looking building in the distance. It was clearly a residential home, although Thomas did not remember ever having seen it before. The path towards the house was not excavated at all, but the curious man decided to go on and check it out anyway. When he headed for the house, it did not take Thomas long to figure out why the building seemed new to him. It was clear from the shapes that the house had previously been surrounded by trees. However, many of them had not survived the recent snowstorms. It was a pitiful sight, which made it look like Thomas had just walked into a graveyard. Luckily, the trees surrounding the house had not hit the walls or roof in their fall. But despite this, the building did not look in great shape, which became more and more clear to Thomas as he got closer to the frozen home. It had been completely exposed to the cold weather and looked like something from a movie. Thomas climbed over the snow towards the front door, after which he peeked through the round window in it. He wiped away the snow, but could not really make anything from what he saw, so he started knocking on the door. If there would be anybody still living here, then maybe he or she needed help, he thought. Thomas knocked a couple of times and waited in between to listen. When nothing came, he started shouting, but still nobody would come to the door. Yet for some reason, Thomas had gotten convinced that somebody was in there, as he kept recognizing hints of sounds from the other side of the door, or so he thought. He could swear that the sounds were coming from the house, and thus started to think it over. Perhaps the person or people in there did not want to be bothered. But what if somebody in there was so weak that he or she could not ask for help anymore? Or maybe it was an animal. Thomas heard himself saying. The door was too thick to know for sure what he had heard in the house, and at this point, Thomas was determined. There was no way he could leave this place behind without knowing for certain what was going on here. He climbed over another pile of snow to be able to look around the house for a new way in. Thomas first tried all the windows on the main floor as well as the back door, but everything was either locked tight or frozen solid. Being a fairly good climber, he made it to the roof to continue his quest, only to face the same situation. Thomas jumped back down into a soft pile of snow, thinking about his next move. He was faced with a dilemma. If Thomas was really going to make it into the house, he would have to either kick a door open or break in through a window. Both options would result in a feeling of guilt due to breaking and entering with all the possible consequences. On the other hand, it could be a risk he would potentially be willing to take. Thomas knew that the best course of action was to just walk away and warn the authorities. He tried all he could within the boundaries of the law and better leave it over to professionals as soon as possible. But when he tried to make a call to the local authorities, he couldn't reach anybody at the other end of the line. Now he was quite sure that no help was coming anytime soon. With nobody on the streets and most people in town still freeing their houses from the storm, authorities would be busy anyway, Thomas thought. So he was willing to go for it. He took off the sweater under his jacket, wrapped his hand in it, and simply smashed one of the windows to pieces. Now he could enter through it, and when he slowly did, it was dead quiet inside. Apart from no sound, there was neither any light coming through the windows. The windows were just small, and most of the light was being kept out by the walls of snow outside. It was a scary scene. Thomas grabbed his phone when he got through and turned on the flashlight. Now he could make his way through the house without stumbling over invisible objects on the floor. He continuously kept calling and asking whether anyone was home or in need of help, but no answers were given. Now that Thomas had taken a better look at the interior, he concluded that, from the inside, the house looked relatively normal, apart from it being fairly old. It was, however, difficult to determine whether anybody had been living here in recent years, since all the corners of the ceiling on the main floor were covered in spider webs. Yes, it was dusty and dirty, but the open spaces had a decadently clean look as well. The chairs and dining table were neatly placed in the middle of the living room, and the carpet underneath the coffee table was in perfect condition. A strange sight overall, but until now, nothing had really stood out to Thomas, at least not yet. After searching the entire bottom floor without any sight of a living being apart from a couple of spiders on the wall, Thomas decided it was time to go up the stairs to check out the rest of the house. The sound that he heard before was gone for quite some time now, which led Thomas to believe that it had all just been in his mind. He immediately came across a locked door when he reached the top of the stairs. He was not an easily scared man, and although the situation he was in would be worrying to others, the feeling of curiosity dominated Thomas's mind. Everything else in the house was open, so what was so special about this room? Thomas kicked in the door and found a litter of puppies and a mother dog. Apparently, the owner of the house had left them behind when he fled for the storm. Thomas took them all to the local vet, who managed to save every single one of the animals.